you know, we still need the stories, whether we read modern novels or not. It's like, you know, we need that connection, whether it's with our elders or with our kids. You know, we pass these stories on as something precious. For me personally, it's probably just the unknown, you know. I've always been drawn more to the unknown and whatever the beyond of normal life. So I would actually go out and look for these. You know, we would go to haunted houses. We would go to haunted areas of the cities. See what was going on, you know? Yeah, now, whatever that comes from, I don't know. But it kept life interesting.
It was almost like an escape.
Definitely an escape. Family life was not a happy life. So that was an escape, definitely.
Hey, welcome to the Floaties for Krakens podcast. I am your host, Camille Maria Costa, and it is a brilliant day to be monstrous. Hi, Cuttlefish. Welcome back to Floaties for Krakens, the super incredible, amazing Queer Pride special. Yay! Welcome. Happy June 1st. Happy Pride Month to everybody who celebrates, and everybody should celebrate because it's an amazing month, and I'm just so thankful and so elated, just so excited because it's such a beautiful month. We've had so many incredible Floaties family that have been on the show that identify as part of, the queer family, whether that's LGBTQIA+, non-binary, right? Like all everything beautifully under the rainbow. So, hi, thank you all for being here. And I hope you know there is always a safe space for every single one of you here, all the time, any given moment of any given day. It is safe. Yeah, also, I'm outside right now because it's raining, and I love the rain, and I feel like it's beautiful to be outside right now. So take some time outside if you're not. If it's safe outside where you are, get some water, something to eat, a nice sweet treat, because you deserve it. But yeah, welcome to our Queer Pride special, Lavender for Monsters. Lavender is such a beautiful metaphor in the queer community. It's utilized in so many different ways, and it's a big indicator of safety and kind of openness with one another, and just positivity, peace, love, just all of the beautiful things that all queer bodies deserve. And I just love the idea of a little monster picking a lavender flower. So welcome to our 4-part special. And of course, let me just I'm just so excited. I can't wait to introduce the incredible, magical, magnificent Robin Gao. Robin is a super freaking hero. Robin is a writer, an author, and just came out with an incredible poetry book called Monstrous Cartography. So I highly recommend everybody get it. It's so amazing. It's so beautiful. I love it so much. Please go support. But also all of Robin's work is kind of freaking incredible and explores the ideas of monstrosity and otherness, right? Whether that is queer bodies or just individuals that don't feel like they fit in. God, and Faye is amazing. I love Robin. Robin, thank you so much for all you do, for fighting for people, and just being such a beautiful light that individuals who feel lost can go to, feel guided by. So thank you for opening this amazing 4-part series. Happy Pride Month, my beautiful cuttlefish. Go dance in the rain today. And without further ado, ladies and cuttlefish, let me introduce to you Puffs Plus for Squonks. Well, hi, Robin, again.
Hello, I'm so happy to be here.
I'm so lucky to have you here. Oh my gosh. And let me just say again, I it has been quite a few rough, interesting weeks, and Robin has been so incredibly patient scheduling this interview because my mind has been all over the place. So I just want to say thank you so much for your patience and kindness, Robin. It means a lot.
It's no problem.
How are you? How's everything?
I'm good. It's been a busy few weeks or months for me as well. So I've been all over the place, but good overall.
That's good. I'm so glad. And for people that may not know or they're the, first time listening to you, who are you, Robin? What do you do?
So I'm an author and a poet. I write books for like middle grade to YA audiences and then also adult poetry books. And I do a lot of other eclectic things as well, but
Yeah,
that's my main focus for today.
that's incredible. And what got you into the world of writing and storytelling and poetry?
That's a really great question. I think it's just literally that like my family always tells stories. My
Yeah.
dad um my dad and my uncle told a lot of like ghost stories and like scary stories as a kid.
Yeah.
Um they were always storytellers and it's interesting cuz like I didn't actually like write until maybe like 3rd or 4th grade because I have some learning disabilities that kind of make it a little difficult to write, but even
Yeah.
before then I would like storyboard things and be like,
Yeah.
"This is my this is my novel."
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So I've always that's always been kind of me.
That's awesome. It's always been in your realm, I guess you could say.
Yes, yes, I think so.
Can I ask what kind of scary stories and ghost stories your family would tell?
Oh my goodness, anything and everything. A lot of stuff we've always lived in very old houses, and so a lot of time I mean, it's not great for a young child to for sleeping, but, like,
Oh my god.
my dad would tell scary stories, like, about our house or about people who live there or about, like, from his own childhood.
Yeah.
Um, my favorite one, though, is that there's, like, an old tannery building across the street,
Okay.
and he said that there is, basically like space aliens that like lived in the basement and he would tell this tale of these space aliens basically like getting the different janitors to like become one of their own people
You're
and so
kidding.
like yeah, it's like very I appreciate the way that like the stories that my family told are usually about our area and usually like either about my family or about things locally nearby. And then I think my dad also kind of embellished some like true crime-ish kind of things that happen nearby as well.
Yeah.
Um yeah, so those are just some samples. Definitely a lot of ghosts
Yeah.
and just I don't know, scary things coming out of the wall. And honestly, they are a little bit like scary for like a kid, but I think like it helped make me who I am. I definitely have always
Yeah.
been we've always read a little bit above like our age level. Like my dad was reading me Kurt Vonnegut like in like maybe like elementary school, which is
Oh my
like
gosh.
a lot of it went over my head. I was
Sure.
like I didn't I didn't process a lot of it. But yeah.
Oh, that's incredible. And I love that your family nurtured that in you and for you to be like, no, look at the beauty of words and storytelling. And maybe this doesn't make sense right now, but still, immersing you in that world is really cool.
Yeah, I feel lucky in a lot of ways like that.
That's really awesome. Oh my gosh, that's so cool. So I guess the spooky has kind of been also in your realm for
Oh,
some time
for
now.
sure. I
Yeah.
remember the first story I wrote in like first grade was genuinely like a zombie story about me and my stuffed teddy bear, like
My
uh
goodness.
helping lay to rest like like essentially the story that I had made up, which isn't that very original, but you know, I was in first grade,
Sounds
was that
original to
like
me.
was basically that like I don't know, some bad people in the town had killed other people and the
Yeah.
people um were becoming zombies because they hadn't ever like had like a resolution to what happened to them. And I remember my teacher being like, "I think that you need to cut that out. That's a little too that's a little too adult." And I was like, "I don't know, it happens."
Yeah, literally. Oh my gosh, that's incredible. That's so cool. Oh my gosh. And like, I mean, zombies, right, are so, I guess, like, how can I explain it? Visceral monsters? Like, there's
Oh
just
yeah,
like,
definitely.
oh my gosh, you just hear, feel all the senses with a
Yeah, for
zombie.
sure.
And that's so intense for a little body. Oh my
I know.
gosh. I love that though. That's really, really cool. I love that you found almost a safety or like a solace in
Oh
the world of
yeah.
those stories, you know?
Oh, definitely. And I think that like I'm sure we'll keep talking about this throughout things, but I've always found like comfort in like spooky or scary things or horror in general.
Yeah.
Um I think like before, because I there weren't like queer stories like when I was a kid, really. I mean, I'm sure that there were. I guess what I should say is there weren't accessible like
Yeah,
queer stories. I think I always
totally.
found myself like represented in like horrible horror things because I feel like monsters are usually just like manifestations of like otherness or like
Yeah.
people's fears around like gender or sexuality or
Mm.
any kind of stuff like that. And so I always found like a connection to any kind of monsters.
Yes, absolutely. Oh my gosh. Okay, and before I want to ask you a question about that, but before we go into that, what do you think a monster is, Robin?
It's such a great question. I think a monster is kind of exactly that, is like something or some manifestation of otherness or scariness in so far a direction that it becomes more than or extra human in some kind of a way. Because
Ooh.
but like at the same time, I think about monsters that are like a blob monster isn't doesn't kind of touch on that as much. But I still think that there's this quality of like monsters generally have a consciousness that's like not equivalent to like animals.
Mm.
Totally, they're always like a little bit more sentient, and so I do think
Yes.
that there is like this quality of like um fear moving so far that it becomes like an entity,
Mm.
um
Mm-hmm.
if that makes sense,
Yes.
which is vague, but yeah, I think that that's what I would give the definition of.
Oh, that's powerful though, right? Like, I mean, it's quite terrifying how fear can manifest.
Yeah, definitely.
Right? Like, it's, I mean, the world is on fire right now, right?
Yes, yes.
And I think it's interesting to see this idea of fear, and how much power and privilege can come from somebody calling somebody a monster, for example, right? It
Yeah,
can
definitely.
so loaded. It's a loaded word, but at the same time, like you said, I'm just like you in the sense of I growing up saw myself in monsters, right? I still see myself in monsters and I find peace and happiness with them because that's us, right? It's like, oh, that's me.
Yeah,
I see myself. It's so complex, but I think it doesn't mean we're not afraid of them. It doesn't mean that they
yeah.
don't spook us, right? At some point. So I love that definition. That's a good definition.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I just came up with it on the fly, so
Well,
I'm
that's
glad it worked
powerful.
out.
And of course, speaking of monsters, I am really, really excited. Okay, everybody. So I'm going to be linking all of Robin's writings in the description box. But we have to talk. I don't know if my light's too bright, but we have to talk about monsters cartography. It's an amazing, amazing piece of work. And Robin, can you tell us a little bit about this poetry book?
Sure, I've been calling it like in two words, like queer sea monsters.
Yes.
But essentially I did a lot of just deep diving into sea monsters and how they are written about from like 15th to 18th century like maps that different people who were sailing in the ocean were writing and creating.
Yeah.
And there's so much like folklore and history around how people were talking about sea monsters. And I think that my particular interest for this book is also intertwined with like the idea of like what it means to be a queer person.
Hmm.
Um, because I found this like overlap with like the idea that sea monsters, at least how they're talking about them in these time periods, are
Yeah.
like um they're trying to put language to something that is real, but like other people haven't seen.
Hmm.
And so I felt like there's like some sort of a like overlap there between the experience of being a queer person and then also that that like it's hard to name what you haven't seen and then try to tell people about
Mm.
it,
Hmm.
which is where a lot of the sea monster stories come from. You can tell it's like a whisper down the alley kind of situation.
Yes, it's transmitted in a way. It's passed
Mhm.
down like folklore is, right? And
Yes, yeah.
very that can be, again, when your story is told not from your own words, not from your own
Yes.
mouth, and then that game of telephone, right? It's completely different. um eh,
Yeah.
right. Oh my gosh, I love that. I want to go right into it because you've mentioned it so brilliantly. But what have you seen? I know you mentioned just now the idea of sea monsters and their relation to queerness, queer bodies, right? And I want to talk to you about that. Like, where do you see the relation? How do you see the relation? Or how did that, birth itself in your brain?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that especially the relation, I one of the other branches of myself is I do like a lot of community education. I do basically like trainings on how to be less terrible
Uh,
to LGBTQ plus people
yes.
and disabled people.
Yes.
And I think I there's this essay that's written by Jameson Green, who's like a trans educator, and he talks about like how he sometimes feels like every time he tells his story, like loses a little bit of himself because he's trying to like make it like palatable or understandable to like non-queer people.
Wow.
It's sometimes when we do this kind of work, it feels a little bit like I'm trying to tell you anything I can tell you so that you'll see me as a human.
Mm,
And like it's important things like people need to have those conversations, but it also does feel a little bit like losing yourself. And then there's the other. I promise I'll end at a point that connects to sea
oh,
monsters,
keep
and then
going.
and then there's the quality of like I have to use these labels because these are the labels that I have access to,
Yeah.
but also like some parts of us, I think a lot of us also just like want to exist and don't also like always feel like in love with the way we have to like use language to like express these things.
Yeah.
I think like there's this like impulse for people to like want to deeply understand every nuance of a person and why they
Mm,
identify the way that they do or stuff
mm,
like that. And I always feel frustrated with that like obsession with trying to understand why, because I'm like, if you are, you are. It doesn't.
yeah.
I don't really know why. And then with
Yeah.
sea monsters, the overlap being there's a lot of like there's first of all there's so much fear around the when sailors are telling stories about these sea monsters, like there's a lot of fear around it, and I think that whenever there's like panic or fear, like I immediately do think about like queer and trans
Mm,
people or really marginalized people in general, because people who essentially this is like a watered down version, but
yeah.
there's this quality of like people who don't know any trans people
Hmm.
being let making up these ideas and stories that spin out of control about like who we are and what we are.
Yeah.
And I think the same thing happens with like the sea monster thing, because really sea monsters are like just you know animals in the ocean.
Yeah.
um, they're
Right.
they're they're just whales or stuff like that, and
Yeah.
like these stories spin so far out. They are manifestations of like all these sailors or people's deepest fears about the unknown. And I think that that's oftentimes what people's fear is with marginalized people, is like you're pushing on your existence, unfortunately, is like pushing on some kind of an unknown, and
Hmm.
people are really uncomfortable with the unknown. I mean, I think that trans people are like a key pressure point, because it's a
Hmm.
question of like, what does it mean to be a gender? And people don't want to think about that. And they
Right.
like panic. And so they're like,
Right.
they must be evil. It's like, no, we probably need to like unpack that a
Yeah.
little bit.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh my God. Absolute. So beautiful. And I mean, obviously, I never want to undermine the pain because you're right. It's painful and it's complex and it's layered and it's difficult. But I also find such beauty in your words of
Oh,
seeing
thank you.
yourself, yes, as well, to me, right, like sea monsters and especially those ancient beasts that exist forever, right? That idea of that
Yeah.
monster constantly being in people's mouths, right? Is beautiful to me. And it's like a powerful, powerful,
Yeah.
right, entity that could eat men and could take them
Yeah.
down, right? Like there is this gorgeous quality to them, but at the same time, like you said, right, it's all based on fear of the unknown, things that people may not understand things that people choose not to understand, right? And just
Yeah.
push away, fearmonger, that whole nine, right? And gosh, I think that's such a beautiful, beautiful parallel. And I love this book. And it's so good. And like I love the way you write, because this is the first work I've read of yours, and I love the way you
Oh,
write. And one of my favorites, I wanted to talk to you about it. If that's okay.
yeah, of
Put you on the
course.
spot. Um I really, really love Sea Devil a lot. I love the painting of I love it. I love this idea. I just I'm obsessed. I think it's so brilliant, and I just love your use of metaphor. I love your use of pain. I love this use of identity and trying to search for it and find it and escape, right?
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah. And I think that that is like a question that I'm exploring in the book too, is like you feel like you're always trying to be pinned down, and
yeah.
then there's also like this impulse towards like trying to slip out of that somehow. Um, and I
Yeah.
think that that's definitely one of the points of like interest for me with the monsters is like they do feel empowering. They feel
Yeah.
like it feels like sometimes being the monster is like, okay, this is like what you think I am, then like I'll be that thing. And I'll talk to you in that voice and,
Yes.
explore that deeper.
Yes, yes. Oh, it's so beautiful. It's so lovely. I can't wait. I'm gonna link it down below. Everybody get one.
I
Because
appreciate it so much.
no, it's so incredible. It's such good work. I love the artistry too. Oh, the illustrations. It's just it's great. It's so great.
Yeah, my partner actually did the cover of the book too.
Really?
Isn't that cool? Yeah.
Oh my
Yeah,
God.
he does like
Rain, right? Is
horror.
that correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
He does horror watercolor art, and so it really I don't know, it was a good easy crossover.
That's you all were made for each other. That's
Yeah.
perfect. Oh, that's so cool. That's so amazing. I love it. Great read. Thank you so much for writing it, because it's important and people need
Yeah, thank
not
you.
only to hear it, but I think there are so many people in the world that can relate. So I think it's
Yeah,
wonderful. Yeah.
thank you.
Okay, well, jumping over to another type of monster, because I am so excited to learn about this guy. Who is the squonk, Robin?
Oh my goodness. So this so the squonk is a creature of basically like woodland Pennsylvania. He has lots of wrinkles and looks kind of like a little pig. Is known to have like a really droopy face. And probably the biggest identifying quality that he's listed as having is like um, he's always crying. He's
Yes,
just like
yes.
gushing tears, and you can follow the tears to try to find him in the woods. Some of the folklore around him says that it's actually really interesting because it has like an environmental like the story always has an environmental spin to it in
Right.
that it's said that he migrated up from the south because of like logging, like the forests are being destroyed, and so the squonk moved into Pennsylvania because of the deforestation. So that's the the
Of
story
course.
behind why he's there. But he's first written about, and there's like a weird creatures of Pennsylvania book that was published in the like I think late 1800s, early 1900s.
Amazing.
But the stories about the squonk are much older, and kind of exist in a lot of small towns, particularly in like northern wooded Pennsylvania.
Gotcha.
And yeah, yeah, that's the squonk,
Oh my
and
gosh.
he's such a sad little guy.
Yeah.
Um, but I love that because one of the reasons why I specifically love like cryptids is because
Yeah.
I do find them they're usually um and I love monsters, but they're usually depicted in a little bit more of like a uncertain territory. It's like we're not sure if this is like what their intentions are. And I think that it just really like speaks to like queerness in general. Like I
Yeah.
so but specifically the squonk, I feel like there's something there's something very sweet and like sad about his story. Um, yeah, that's a
Yeah.
squonk.
Yes, the sweet little squonk. And you mentioned this already, but for people that maybe just don't know what a cryptid is, what and I know these guys, just like monsters, are so hard to define, but in your words, in your eyes, what do you think is a cryptid?
I think it's a creature that may or may not be real. It has not been
Mm,
proven either either way.
yeah.
Um, and I think they're very similar to monsters in that they often emerge around some kind of a fear or like curiosity.
Yeah.
And I think if you find any cryptid, or you'll find you can follow it towards some sort of a societal fear or something like that. But I
Mm,
think that with cryptids, there's a little bit more of the unknown, because there's like this creature could actually be real, and so when a creature could actually be real, there's like the way people interact with it is just like very curious.
yeah.
So so yeah, that's my cryptid
I
definition.
love that. Yes, absolutely. And there's, like you said, this kind of air of like, we don't know if we can believe,
Mhm.
right, this story or these sightings by people, let
Yeah.
alone the actual being. So there's a lot of questioning. There's a lot of not believing, right? There's a
Yeah.
lot of shutting people down that, or the being itself, right? And you mentioned too that the squonk, oh gosh, it has like ties with like the logging industry and things like that,
Yeah.
deforestation, what have you. And I find it so fascinating how cryptids are almost always related to the environment, in
Yes.
some way, you know? I,
Yeah, definitely. And usually like speaking towards something that's wrong with it,
yeah.
or something that's like painful that's happened within it.
Yes. Yeah, painful. Exactly that. Yes. And I find that so fascinating. And I don't know. I feel like they're also many depictions of them is also being like these warning signs, right?
Yeah,
Right.
definitely.
Like
Yeah.
I know you've written work on Mothman, isn't that correct?
Oh yeah, I I love Mothman,
Yes.
and his story is very very similar in that like he's always up, usually like a harbinger of something bad.
Yeah.
And then like his connections to like is there some sort of a like dumping site or something
Yes.
in Point Pleasant, and so
Yes.
there's that like an environmental tie there too.
It's fascinating to me. And I don't know. I just feel like they're always misunderstood in every story you ever
Yeah.
hear. And I found it so beautiful. I think, if I'm not mistaken, Robin, the first time, at least on like social media or like in pop culture, that I saw the relation between cryptids and queerness was through Mothman. I think that was the first time I saw people
Yeah.
being like, yes, right? Like Daddy Mothman and like finding,
Yes.
right? Like, so
Yes.
cool.
There was an essay published maybe not that long ago, but maybe
Yeah.
like 2015, where somebody was writing about how he connected to Mothman as a gay man. And I
Ah,
think that like I think that there was always a relationship, but I think that that kind of opened the floodgates. And I've loved that. I think that the community has really like taken to finding solace in a lot of these creatures in a new way recently, more than ever.
yeah. Why do you think that is? And like I know, right, like you talked about it at the beginning in terms of your relation with monsters, or specifically sea monsters, right? And queerness. But why do you think it's become such a safe place, um, in that
Yeah,
world?
I think it's like a reckoning, or like a embracing the unknown about ourselves.
Yeah.
Like I think that there is like a something really beautiful about that. Like my favorite definition of queerness is by Jose Esteban Munoz, who says that queerness is like not yet here. And I just think that that's such a
Huh.
beautiful definition, and there's some really deep connection with that definition and like monsters or like cryptids specifically, in that like
Yes.
they represent a question of, is this real?
Mm.
And so I think that that draws queer people in. And when and you know, you see all the fan art of the monsters, and like
Oh
when you can
yes.
depict them as sweet or caring, and like
Yeah.
I think it's a way of like being caring towards that part of yourself that you're unsure about, or like that unknown in general.
Monsters are like a beautiful way to, I feel like, explore shadow work, or like, right, like
Oh, for
healing
sure.
yourself. And
100%. Yeah.
totally. It's like, and I mean, I don't know the psychological reasonings behind it really, but I don't know. I just feel like very difficult conversations, maybe traumatic experiences or what have you, they're so much easier to digest or communicate about, like through metaphor in general, but
Oh
like I
yeah.
think with monsters, it's like so much easier to paint a picture. If this
Yes.
monster, for example, the squonk, right? Like this squonk is crying. It's having a
Yeah.
really hard time, for example, and it's like kind of exploring like, well, sometimes I feel like a wrinkly little crying squonk,
Yeah.
right? And it's interesting and safe, but like to explore it that way, I guess, you know?
Yeah, definitely. I agree with everything that you're saying. Yeah, it gives space for those feelings and makes them feel, ironically, like less scary, I think.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. It makes you feel, you know, I love in the beginning when you were saying like the definition of monster and how you were saying almost like double the humanness, or like this idea of extending the humanness as well, because too much, right? And
Yeah.
I don't know, I feel like it's so hilarious how we learn how to be more human through monsters. If
Yes.
that makes
Yeah.
any
Totally.
sense
No,
at
definitely. I
all.
think so. No, I totally see that. Yeah,
It's fun. It's fun to talk about that stuff. Yeah.
100%.
Okay. So back to the squonk and this idea of him them crying, right? Like trails of tears. Like that is such a profound thing to happen to anybody. Why do you think tears are a huge indicator that either the squonk is around, or why do you think that is a huge, whether it's a defense mechanism or just a
Yeah.
natural thing, right? Why?
I mean, like, this is getting, like, philosophical, but I do
Love
feel
it.
like it's, like, a early manifestation of, like, climate grief, if that makes any sense, like, a
Wow.
grief around, like, human destruction or, like I feel like the squonk, like, bears the weight of, like, the forest in that, like, he
Mm.
like, I feel like that's why he's sad because, like, that story about him being, like, a displaced being, like,
Yes.
already,
Yes.
and then, like, living in this forest and probably feeling, like, unmoored a little bit. I think that he like bears that weight because you have to ask like why would an animal like keep like always be crying,
Yes.
um,
Yes.
and then like people's desire to find the squonk in the stories that I've read about it
Yeah.
is fascinating because usually people are trying to like hunt an animal, but it's almost
Oh.
meditative, but not for the squonk. Like they're
Right.
not trying to hunt him. It's like almost like meditative to be like, I'm curious about finding the squonk, or like people are warned to like not go too close to the squonk. So it's almost like in that way also kind of like a manifestation of like I think that in specifically like a United States context, like people are really uncomfortable with like grief. And
Mm.
like I think that there's like the two pieces of the like the climate grief thing, and then also the like the way people interact with it is like not sure if you want to go so far
Mm.
as to follow the tears to like this creature that's holding
Yeah.
that. um
Yes.
yeah, and, like, it's so interesting because he looks so silly, but he's very profound, like, very profound. I always joke that
Yeah.
he looks like I have 2 pug dogs,
Oh my
and I always joke
goodness.
that they are squonks, like, they look like it
Just
because 'cause they're
wrinkly
just
little.
yes, just wrinkly little babies, and my one dog is always crying, and so she's, like, definitely a
Ah,
squonk.
I love that. That's so true. And like I mean, unpacking grief, right, is just a whole other show. I feel like grief
Yeah,
in any way is just so complicated and so difficult. Not everybody does it the same way. I don't think two people can grieve the
yeah,
same way. And I am so fascinated by this futuristic, not futuristic, present idea of climate
yeah,
grief. Of, you know, I mean, it's so heartbreaking and so terrifying to think about the state
yeah,
of the environment and the world and what can happen in just a year. Um, and seeing that go and seeing that die right before your eyes. And I think we've seen very many renditions of the idea that, right, like climate change isn't real and like
yeah, yeah,
XYZ. And I feel like a lot of that is fear. I feel like a lot of that is
mhm,
not wanting to face that grief, not wanting to face the reality of the situation.
yeah,
um,
for sure.
and I love that idea of the squonk acting as that, you know, facing that reality, facing that grief head on, you know.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
which breaks my heart too because
I
and
know,
maybe
poor little guy. He shouldn't have to do that alone.
you know what I mean? And like maybe I'm getting philosophical too, but I think it speaks a lot to you know how you mentioned, Robin, kind of the weight and the responsibility placed on queer bodies to explain themselves, right? To have to
Mhm.
prove themselves and be like, no, this is who I am, and I shouldn't have to prove it or explain it, to validate it to anybody. And I feel in the same way, the squonk is holding all this responsibility of
Yeah.
proving and grief and holding other people's ugly feelings. And I don't know, like I feel like that's another that's so heartbreaking to me that they have to have that responsibility, you
Yeah,
know?
and I think that that happens for a lot of a lot of other cryptids if we just like continue that as like a cryptid's holding like the responsibility of like whatever kind of a issue that they're at the intersection of, or like whatever kind of a fear they're pushing on.
Yes.
They're kind of holding on. They're born out of that space of people not being able to face the thing. Um,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh, it's wild to me. And I know you said too that there have been a few stories that you've read or listened to about the squonk and how people search almost ritualistically, right? Like
yes, yeah.
meditatively. Are there any stories that have stuck out to you with the squonk? And that could be something you've heard, or maybe even in pop culture. I don't know if the squonk exists in pop
Yeah.
culture, but I'm very curious.
I don't know how much the squonk exists in pop culture. I think that I think about him so much that like I think that he's more well known than I think he actually
Sure.
is.
Yeah.
Um, but some of the ones that I read specifically from some of those early guides are usually like a father telling a story to like a son, which is also an interesting dynamic.
Mm.
And usually kind of like it's usually like a cautionary tale as to like not follow the tears.
Yeah.
Because there's also this idea that if you follow them, you might get like stuck, like, and
Mm.
you might be wandering like the squonk, like stuck in the woods, wandering like the squonk.
Mm.
Um, which is so fascinating because um, you know, that's just like so clearly related to like not expressing grief too much. And like not and then the fact that it's usually told to around boys. I mean, I've never read a story that
Yeah.
had to do with girls. There's something about like in the storytelling, something about masculinity there too,
Yes.
which is just it's just all very fascinating, but that's usually
Gosh.
the course that the stories run is like a father or somebody telling something to younger people to be like to be aware of it. And also I think it's related to that general thing that don't go too deep in the woods.
Yeah, of
I mean, I think that
course.
that's like most monster stories have some element of like you shouldn't go too far in the woods, so like
Never.
that part is like, I get that, but then it's sewn with these other contexts and stuff.
I love that. Ah, I never thought about that either. This idea of kind of repressing your emotions. And that can happen in a lot of toxic masculinity, right? And
Yeah,
that's so interesting. And I mean, for one, I love monsters that grieve, that cry. I think there is
yeah.
something so haunting about
Yeah.
that. I did a lot of research and work with the Weeping Woman with La Llorona in Mexican
Oh, yeah,
culture.
yeah.
Love her. She's my girl. And, you know, I learned so much, I think, about my Mexican heritage, but most importantly, like my father and kind of
Yeah.
that toxic masculinity that he had to deal with. And I mean, I've seen him cry, what, twice, like in my whole life. And much like we were talking about earlier, I think it's interesting how these narratives and these monsters that outwardly cry, that outwardly express their
Yeah.
emotions can bring that out of you. Um,
Yeah.
right? Like in so many different
Yeah.
ways.
In a lot of ways, it's like again, like bearing that weight of a lot of pain and like feeling it while people for people who can't feel it too. Like
Oh,
I kind of see that a little bit.
yes, yes, they hold it. They
Yeah.
represent it in that way. Ah, I think the one story I had ever heard about the squonk was very similar to yours about this idea of somebody searching for it or hunting it or what have you. And the thing that I remember is somebody did catch it But when they got home and opened the bag or the sack, it was just
Yes,
a puddle of
yes,
tears, I think, is
yes.
which is fascinating too.
Oh yeah, it's
Right?
elusive. It's a little bit like a almost like a leprechaun in that way, in that like you can't really
Mm,
catch it.
yeah.
Um, I think that people in these stories usually get drawn to being like, I have to find this because I've been following this for so long,
Yeah.
and then never being able to take that creature all the way home.
Oh, oh my gosh, yes. And I mean, and that's crazy too. I think if we think again about this idea of the environment, you're
Yes.
also robbing this creature of a home,
Yeah,
right?
for sure. Yeah.
I don't know. I find it, I don't know. And when we really think about it, the idea and the concept of monsters and home, the sense of home and the sense of place, is very interesting. Um,
Yeah, definitely.
right? It's almost like, I guess, animalistic in quality in the sense of like protecting maybe territory or like don't come, don't, pass this what border or what have you. Um, but it's so interesting, and almost always I feel like somebody's sense of place, that trust is broken. Somebody breaks
Yeah.
in, destroys it, right? Doing stuff that humans should never be doing, and then that's
Yeah.
what starts the scary story, right? Like you
Yeah.
infiltrated my home, and I'm
Yeah.
protecting it, and this is my space. Um, or the monster is searching for a home, is searching for their place of origin, um which is
Yeah.
interesting, and I think many people can relate to that idea too.
Yeah, and it's also interesting then too that like we paint the monster usually in stories as like the bad thing. Like even though the story is so clearly pointing to the fact that like this creature is displaced or like it was
Yes.
people's fault that it's the way it is.
Yeah.
Um and yeah, it's still like even when I think about like scary movies or these stories, the monster is like is always still like the antagonist and the person is the protagonist.
Gosh.
Um then there's not usually a reversal. I can't really think of an example, at least for the Squonk or anything that I can think of.
Yeah.
A lot of that reversal of seeing like the reckoning with the fact that like humans made the monster in some kind of a way.
Of course, and like it's always a human's definition of what a
Yeah,
monster is, right? And they never really get the chance, um to be able to talk about it, to be able to have
yeah,
the language, the privilege of the language to talk about who
yeah.
they are and why they exist. I was just watching the old 2014 Planet of the Apes the other day.
Oh wow, yeah,
Um, so I mean, that story's been, utilized in so many different ways and different avenues of art and things. This idea, right, of the human kind of befriending an animal, right, a monkey in this case,
yeah,
and there's obviously really horrible humans, duh, in this world that
yeah,
mistreat the animal and call them monsters and make them into monsters and XYZ. And there's this really heartbreaking moment in the movie where there's two monkeys, right, that know how to communicate and have seen two sides of humans. One of them grew up with a very loving human that gave them everything, and one grew up being abused and tortured by humans.
yeah,
And it's so heartbreaking to be like that. You see this monkey hate and want to kill and want to never be friends, right, with humans. And it's because he learned hate from humans, right? He did not learn
yeah,
to
for
love. He
sure.
did not learn kindness and generosity and any of that. All he's ever known was hatred and pain.
Yeah,
And I think that's a very profound way of thinking with what humans get to decide as monstrous. They have so much control
yeah,
in that way. Um, it's horrible. It's terrifying. And if you grow up your whole life thinking you're a monster, then you're a monster in that context,
yeah,
right? The
yeah,
monster,
definitely.
right? The bad monster that people want to paint you as. It's
Yeah,
horrifying.
definitely. Yeah. And I mean, like, just such a direct parallel with like the experiences of just like multiple different marginalized communities. Because when we think of like the common narrative, is usually like people are depicted as monsters for ever pushing back
Mm,
against anything, like at all.
yeah,
Like you're expected to like be essentially like a perfect victim in any kind of sense. And I think that so much, I mean, all of our history, I mean, I think that there's change happening, but
sure.
it's always written by like the dominant force, and that practice is so related to this, in that like in the story of the monster, in that like people are made out to be monsters for responding to what happened to them.
Mm. Oh, it's so heartbreaking. It's so horrible. And you're right, this idea of pushback, right? Like, oh, suddenly you push back, you're a monster. You're the
Yeah.
bad guy. You're the antagonist in this narrative, or what have you, even though they're just maybe defending their home. Maybe they're defending their
Yes.
will to live, their right to live, their
Yeah.
existence, just trying to be, you know, oh, gosh, it's so heartbreaking. You know what that reminds me of too? Have you ever seen Paranorman, Robin?
No, I haven't. I've heard it's very sweet though. I should.
I feel like you would love it. I don't want to tell you, okay, I don't want to give anything away because there is, some great reveals in there. I was just going to say that story. I love narratives in which you think you know who the bad guy is, right? You think
Yeah,
oh,
yeah.
yeah, this is the monster or whatever. And it's like, oh, no, it's not.
And then it
No, it
gets
is
turned
not.
around. Yeah. I
Yes.
do. I like that too, especially when then the monster is like the actual monster in the society, and not the monsters.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And I don't know. I I really wish there was a book or a movie or something that existed in which cryptids uh, got to tell the story finally, um,
Yeah, yeah.
for
I think that
themselves.
I think that I think that their time will definitely come. I think that there's got to be some more cryptid told stories.
There has to
Yeah.
be. There has to be.
Yeah.
Gosh. Well, why do you think the squonk exists, Robin? I know we've talked about it in so many different ways, but why is that story? Why is that creature? Why is that monster? Why is this entity's existence so necessary?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's born out of like both a lot of the things that I've talked about in terms of like curiosity about like changing environment, people's fear of changing environment, and people I think that it's the story must be born out of like also a curiosity a little bit,
Hmm.
because there is that idea of the trail and like the idea of following the trail.
Yes.
And so I think that he comes from curiosity. Um which isn't necessarily like a bad impulse. Like I don't think he's a monster that's totally demonized.
Sure.
And I think that there's something really beautifully human about that trying to put a name or a face to your curiosity about unknowns,
Mm. Mm.
or about, in this case, unknowns about like following grief, and then unknowns about the forest too, because especially in like northern Pennsylvania,
Yeah.
it's not necessarily like Appalachia, but it's like definitely connected to that history of like a reverence or a fear around like the deep wilderness,
Yeah.
and like a a rightful fear. And I think that along with that is also like the trying again like that reverence towards the forest too, because like it'll kill you, you know.
Yes. Yeah. Very, very much so. Yeah. Oh. Oh, that's beautiful. I don't know. That's so wild to
Yeah.
me. Ah, that's so beautiful. And why do you think the squonk has made such a presence in your life? Why, I always find it so like beautiful when
Yeah.
people have a monster, right, that they really love, and how they see it come back throughout their life
Yeah.
or throughout for example, as an artist, right, it's like, oh yeah, I always have to do art around this character. I see writers that are like, oh yeah, I always have to write about this monster, right? Like, why do you think it's been made such a presence in your life?
Yeah. Well, I mean, like at a very basic level, like I'm a crybaby. Like I cry a
My
lot,
gosh,
and so
me.
um and so like when I heard about the squonk, I think that that was my immediate connection, is like as somebody who cries a lot, like um being like, "Aw, like he gets me."
Yes,
And
yes.
I think that I think that understanding the story of the squonk also like helps me find meaning in like the ways that I feel deeply.
Mm,
Because it's again, it's not something that's like readily embraced to be like very emotional.
no.
And so I think I find a lot of like comfort in a monster that like his whole thing is like he's consumed by his emotions. Um, at least that's how I interpret his crying. Um,
Yes.
like and so I think that that's like why I love him, and I find a lot of like comfort um in him. And I actually I've written two pieces of that are about the squonk and like characters interacting with the squonk. None of them
Yes.
they haven't come out yet, but I
Okay.
have like I have a children's picture book that's about
Oh.
a young trans boy who is a crybaby and like
Ah,
wants to find the squonk as like a, you know, like there's a creature that's like me. He has a lot of older brothers, and so he kind of feels like he's very like, you know, effeminate. He's not very
yeah.
uh rough. And so I
Mm.
think that like the same reasons that he connects with the squonk are the reasons that I do, in that like it's a feeling of not being alone. It's a
Ah,
feeling of like there's something kind of almost magical and
yeah.
like powerful
Yeah.
that you can connect to in that way.
That's
Yeah.
so freaking beautiful, Robin. I'm trying
Aw,
to cry
thanks.
now. It's beautiful. I mean, as a fellow empath, as a fellow, I will cry on command for
Yeah.
anything. And as a person that definitely got bullied growing up for feeling
Yeah.
too much, right? You have a superpower, right? Like you have nobody can feel like you do, and that is so rare, especially in a world that is so quick to hate and is so quick to be
Yeah,
cold,
definitely.
right? And
Yeah,
responding with emotion and responding with kindness, and you feel so much about something
yeah,
that you literally magically make water with your
yeah,
body, right? Like that's
yeah, it's very beautiful.
so beautiful. Oh, I can't wait until you that book comes out. I am very excited. Please let us know when,
I will.
because we're gonna plaster it everywhere because that sounds absolutely beautiful. And I also love the idea. I mean, granted, I don't know where you're gonna go with the story, but I just love the idea that they have each other,
Yeah,
um,
yeah,
right? They can recognize each other and see each other and exist with each other. I think that's so beautiful. Oh, I love it. I love
yeah,
it.
thanks.
Yeah.
I think that that's definitely like a theme that I've carried in a few of my like writing pieces, because that's like the heart of Dear Mothman too, basically, which is the
Yes.
my middle grade
Yes.
book, is really just about like finding a connection with a monster. And I think it's just really back to like myself as a kid. Like I was often like very lonely, I didn't have like a lot of friends. And I think that I was pretty heavily bullied.
Mm.
And for me, like I found a lot of like refuge in like monster stories and making up monsters, and like I had invented like a whole I don't know, like mythical world on top of my world, and just like those things that you do to cope with that.
Yeah. Yes.
And
Yes.
so I write stories that are, you know, touch similar experiences, because that's what I know.
And that's beautiful, and people need it. You need to
Yeah,
tell your story and talk about it because so many people can find solace in your bravery and being like, "Oh my gosh, like somebody else felt that way too. I'm
yeah,
not alone. I'm not different in that way. I can exist as myself. I don't have to
yeah,
change. That's rare. And god, I love kids that grew up with monsters. I love it. I love it. I feel like there's something we can all share in
definitely.
some way, and I'm sure our minds were dark and weird and so wacky, but in the best way. And I think you said it perfectly, that idea of a coping mechanism. um Very real.
Yeah,
Very, very real. So I mean, kind of branching off of what you just said, right? Why not just cryptids, not just the squonk, but why are monsters so important? Why should we keep talking about them? Why should we keep writing about them, creating art
yeah.
with them, right? Like why should they continue to exist?
I mean, I think it's about that like reckoning with the fear.
Yeah.
Like I think that we need to reckon with the things that society is afraid of. And monsters are usually like that ability to reckon. And I think sometimes it's easier almost to talk or find your way to a conversation through a metaphor. Um,
Always.
because yeah, I mean, I think that that's why humans are like enamored with metaphor and symbol, is because it's so hard to talk directly about the thing. Yeah.
Okay. Please tell everyone what just happened just now.
So a transformer blew, and like everything in my house went totally dark, and I'm like very superstitious, and so my like immediate impulse was like, oh my gosh, we talked too much about monsters, like
Oh
something
no.
wild has happened.
Oh
Obviously it
my
was just a
gosh.
transformer blowing, but it definitely made me be like, oh my god.
Baby, sorry.
And then I misspeak, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to misrepresent
No.
you.
No, I think what was so crazy too is, I mean, on my end, you froze after like we all need to reckon, and then like it froze, and I
Oh
was like,
my gosh.
I was like, oh my god, yes we do, yes we do, like we need to. Oh my gosh. Well,
Oh
continue,
my goodness.
continue. I'm so
Well,
sorry. We were
no, oh,
talking
you're
about it.
totally fine. Yeah, I guess what I was saying is like needing to reckon with the thing that the monster is, putting pressure on, and monsters really giving us that space to be able to do that. And I think that there will always be new monsters, and that monsters will always cycle in and out of like relevance. Like a monster I think about too
Mm.
is a lot is not as related, but like the vampire I think about a lot, and like
Oh,
the
yes.
reasons why the vampire becomes like relevant again and again. Um, and usually it's like slightly different, but there's always some sort of a tie to like sexuality or like
Yes.
some sort of a panic around that. And so I think that
Yes.
that's a just a case study, and like monsters are always going to be important for having a place to work out our like fears or whatever society's like grappling with at the moment.
As you mentioned, a reckoning, right? And
Yes.
a safe a safe space that many people may not have in any other way.
Yeah.
Um, oh, I love that. I think that's beautiful. That's so great. Okay, well, get into the complicated ending questions, but do you think that the squonk is scary?
Not at all.
Yeah.
I don't find like most scary things like scary.
Yeah.
So so I'm not always like the best person to ask.
That-
But
that's great.
like when like I talk about horror movies, I'm like, that's my comfort movie.
I go to sleep to that every
Yes,
night.
yes. But I don't think the Squonk is scary. I think that if anything, I feel like he's a little bit inviting in terms of like, but
Mm,
that's just because like everything he represents are like things I want to talk about, and so like
yes.
I don't find him scary.
Oh, I love that. It's normal. He's
Yeah,
he's just feeling a lot. That's all. And those things don't have to be scary.
yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the other thing that makes me think about is like we were talking a little bit about how like feeling too much is often like really not looked at well, or like people are really
Yeah.
mean to people who feel too much. And I think the reality is like people who feel too much, or air quote, like it's also like a natural reaction to the world, and sometimes it makes you feel
Mm,
like completely unmoored when you're like, why isn't everyone else like feeling this? And I
yeah.
think that's another reason why I like not scared of monsters or things, is because it's like it's making tangible the thing that like is hard to make tangible.
Yes.
Yeah.
They are like physical
Yeah.
emotion. Like they are the embodiment of all of these things that are not talked about or not, something that you're afraid of. I mean, you're so right, and that's so fascinating. They are the difficult things. They are the uncomfortable things. They
Yeah.
are this scary things for some people, right? And
Yeah.
it's amazing, you
Yeah.
know. Okay. Well, do you think, Robin, that the squonk is a monster?
um yeah, I definitely think so, just based on like his qualities and such. He's definitely he's definitely scary to other people, and I think that some
Yeah.
of the qualities of the manifesting the scary things that people are afraid of definitely give him a monster quality. And then some of that, like luring people a little bit with the Trail of Tears a little bit.
Mm.
Like there's some sort of a like pulling you into a darkness, which is great. But definitely it's giving monster to me.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And it's amazing. I mean, like especially with your definition, right?
Yeah,
It's also that idea of things don't really grow unless in uncomfortability,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Like growing and changing. It's important, it's natural.
yeah,
But
for
it's
sure.
hard and can be messy and ugly and strange and emotional. And I think the squonk does that beautifully.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
agree.
Okay. Well, last question, unfortunately, even though I know we could probably talk about this
Yeah.
for like 8 hours.
I
And
know, I know.
we don't want to blow any more transformers or anything like that. But say you're just chilling, just relaxing, having a lovely day, and all of a sudden, I don't know if the squonk would knock. I don't know how they would make themselves like appear to you, but for whatever reason, the squonk appears to you. What would you do? What would you say? How would you react in that moment?
I think that I react probably similar to the way I react when I see any other kinds of wild animals. I like want to give it its space.
Sure.
Like, I guess that's probably how I would interact with it. Like my impulse is always to ask even just like wildlife like questions about the universe because I feel like they have so much wisdom. So I would
Uh,
probably try to get some sort of a information from a visitation from the squonk, but I would
yeah.
also try to really give it its space. Um, I like I used to live in like more woody Pennsylvania. Now I'm more like farmland. But
Yeah.
when I would walk, I would often see like bears.
Oh
And
my
I
goodness.
yeah,
Jeez.
yeah, I know. And like I think I'd probably interact with Squonk a little bit similar to that in that like you're like, okay, like this is yours. I am gonna be nice.
Yeah.
And I don't think that the Squonk would hurt me or anything. I think I just like encountering like any kind of a honestly any wildlife again, like I feel like they're,
Yeah.
you know, there's some sort of a like universal like divinity within all beings, and so
Me
like I
too.
want to be like kind to that.
Yeah.
And I would definitely try to resist the impulse to follow it too because I don't know if it would want that. Like I wouldn't want to like
Mm,
make it feel watched because I think that when you respect an animal or like a creature, like
yeah.
that's when you can form the best connection. So I try to be very nice, but if I knew where it lived, I would definitely like leave little offerings for it. Like that's just
That's
like the witch in me is like
yeah, I
I don't
love
want to
it.
disrespect it, but I might leave a little bowl of like apples or something. I imagine it probably likes apples.
Oh, who doesn't? Who doesn't love
Yeah.
a good apple? It's like here are some lotion-filled Kleenex for
Yes.
you. Just some
Yeah.
Vaseline, some lotion, just to, I know crying takes a lot out of your body. It's like, here's some water.
Yeah, for
Just
sure.
recharge your little body. Oh, that's lovely. And I think, again, talking to this idea of the environment and to animals and just let them be, right?
Yeah.
Like, let them live and exist, and you can respect that and you can love that, but you can also do that from afar. Um,
Totally. Totally.
and that's important. You gotta give
Mhm.
them their space. I
100%.
love
Yeah.
that, Robin. That's beautiful. That's so lovely. Ah, so amazing. What are we channeling, Robin?
It's
What
a
are we
lot.
doing?
I know. I'm like, oh my goodness, I haven't had this much. It's like I don't know the monster activity going on.
I love it. Hopefully it's all good and all in good fun.
I believe it is.
Yeah, me too. Me too. This episode of Floaties for Krakens was written and recorded by me, Camille Maria Costa. A monstrous thank you to Robin Gao for such a kind interview. A big thank you to Michael Kosman for producing a stellar episode, and a huge thank you to Natalie Hedberg for designing such a phenomenal logo. And music for the show was also written and produced by me, with a special appearance by my tata, Toby Acosta. Thank you all so much for tuning into today's show. It truly means everything to me. If you have questions or curiosities about the research or media referenced in today's episode, everything will hopefully be in the description box. And you can find us on our website or our socials, links in the descriptions as well. Anyway, thanks again for being here, everyone. And just a reminder, it's okay to be afraid of the monster, but it's also okay to love the heck out of it too. Keep being monstrous and keep shining bright.